We made this.
Welcome to the Japan on Film podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine, and welcome your returning guest, and that is Joshua Cervenka. Josh, how you doing today?
I'm doing all right. How about yourself?
I'm doing pretty good. So it's been a while since we had you on, so why don't you take a few minutes and remind the listeners about who you are, what you do?
So previously we did the film on Girl Who Left Through Time, the animated one, which is one of my favorite animated films. And at that point in time, I was teaching in Japan, so it worked out perfectly for timing wise for us. Because I remember you mentioning most of your guests end up being sometimes in a different time zone. So
Yeah.
But since then, I've moved back to America, Chicagoland area, and I'm actually working for Public Works in one of the suburbs. So.
Just got to ask, because I'm from the northwest suburbs. Which suburb are you in?
Right now, I'm in Wheaton.
Oh, okay. I'm from Des Plaines.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I'm actually going to be, do you know the Big Nose Theater?
No, I think that might have come up after I left.
Okay, yeah. I'm actually playing in the pit there for a musical there soon.
Oh, cool. Nice. We're actually planning a trip out there this summer. So we're going to be staying up there with my sister. So we're not going to be staying in Des Plaines, but my mom still lives there. So we'll be spending a lot of time out in that area. It's come up a lot since I left. So it's much nicer than it was when I left. But anyway, why'd you decide to go back to America? Why didn't you didn't decide to become a lifer like the few of
like
us?
A lot of people. Yeah. Well, my partner and I, we both moved out there. We were both teaching, and then she ended up moving in with me. And then at some point, we were kind of talking, do we want to stay a little bit longer? Do we want to go back home? And I think we ended up deciding that we wanted to end up just coming back. And I kept studying when I was out there, trying to keep moving up the levels. And I was come back, maybe get something in that kind of field, maybe either business-wise. But long story short, life kind of took me in another direction, and here we go.
That happens. Yeah. That's a common story for a lot of people. I was going to say something about that, but that was what I was going to say. How was the reverse culture shock? Did you experience much of that?
So the first time I came back after studying abroad, I think it was less the second time because I kind of just knew what to expect. But I just remember the first time, America is just so large and everything's so spread out. Just getting used to that and everything not being shrunken down and smaller, hitting my head. I'm 6'2", so I've definitely hit my head quite a few times in Japan, even though trying to be super conscious about, entering the train, for example.
Okay. All right. So today we're talking about Lady Snowblood, Love Song of Vengeance. This was the sequel to the so this one came out in 1974, sequel to the 1973 Lady Snowblood, which of course was based on the manga by blanking on it right now. Kazuo Koike and Kazuo Kamimura. Kazuo Koike also most famous for Lone Wolf and Cub manga. And when I picked this up, I had picked up it was in the Criterion box set. It's the first one and the second one in a set together. And I actually hadn't seen the second one until the other night to prepare for this episode, but I love the first one. I teach it in my class every year. But let's talk a little bit about the first one. I've actually done an episode on it way back, I think when the show was still just me going solo. But let's talk a little bit about the first one and about this franchise. What kind of history, if any, do you have with it?
So I've seen the first one a couple times. And I know the reason I ended up watching the first one was because of Kill Bill. And so went back. I actually watched the first one again recently too, just to get ready to watch the second one because I've never seen the second one, and I actually never looked up any plot lines of the second one. So yeah, somewhat familiar with it. Watched it again recently. So yeah, I haven't.
Sorry. Go ahead.
No, what were you gonna say?
No. Go ahead. I thought you were done, so keep going.
No. Because you mentioned the Lone Wolf and Cub stuff. And actually was looking at that. They have a box set too on Criterion as well, and I was looking at that actually recently too, because kind of get back into it. I just recently watched Kill Bill again too, just to kind of see some of the, if there was any of like mirroring in that movie too, as well from the second Lady Snowblood. So then I was looking up more kind of like samurai-esque films too, and yeah.
Yeah. So, what were your thoughts about this film?
So going into it, I was expecting it to be more, since I didn't look up any of the plot points, I was expecting it more to be, you remember in the first one, she ends up killing that one like girl's father, like what was her name? I just remember her, like, Takumura, I think was her dad's name. And so I was expecting,
I can't remember offhand, but that's a plot. That's a plot point I talk about in my class because the contrast between the two women.
Yeah. So I was expecting maybe it would kind of pick up after that in the second one, but it had nothing to do with that at all. And it was a lot more, politically involved. I think in the second one.
Yeah. So I just double checked the name. That was Kobue in the first one. Was the girl's daughter's name? That was a point I bring up in my class whenever I teach Lady Snowblood, is just the contrast between those two characters, because they're both these children who were shouldered with the burdens of their parents. Yuki with the vengeance thing, Kobue with her father's debts, and just like the different contrasts. Yuki's always dressed in cool colors. She's very pale. She's very aloof personality. Kobue's very warm. She's always dressed in red. And also in that movie, which is interesting, which is a big departure from the comics, I found out after I started reading some of the manga, is that Yuki is very chaste in these movies. You almost never see her. Like, there's that brief romance in the first movie, but it never is consummated in any sort of way. Whereas Kobue is, she's a sex worker. So there's that contrast as well. So there's some really interesting things they were doing with those two characters in that movie. And when I bought these movies at the same time, so I knew there was a sequel. And when I got to the end of the first movie, I was kind of surprised because the first movie ends with Yuki apparently dying. And then this movie, it opens up and there's zero mention of that whatsoever.
Yeah, that kind of threw me off. Where she's like in like a kind of a grave. I think she was like, I read up on it because I was kind of trying to figure out why she was there. I think it was like her grandparents or parents' grave or something like that.
I thought it was her mother's grave and her mother's family. Is what because they have that one, because there are three graves, and one of them they just have the first name, so I assumed that was the son who had died, the little boy who had died at the beginning of the first movie. So I think that was just like, and that's like the only connective tissue we get. That, and then when she's in prison, there's a voiceover mentioning about that was where she was born and all that. But other than those two scenes, you could change Yuki's name and this would be and people would not be confused at all. You could have this be a completely separate movie. It's very similar to, have you ever seen Sanjuro?
I have not, now.
Okay, so Sanjuro is the sequel to Yojimbo, and it's a very similar thing where you could change the main character's name. In fact, Sanjuro actually started off as a separate movie, and then after the success of Yojimbo, Kurosawa had done a rewrite on the script to make it a sequel instead. But it doesn't have to be a sequel. Like, it could very easily be its own movie. Lady Snowblood, Love Song of Vengeance, very same idea. Like, the whole, even the title, Love Song of Vengeance, there is nothing really connected to vengeance in this movie whatsoever.
Yeah, that's another thing that kind of threw me off. I was like, expecting, like, I see that title and I'm expecting, okay, maybe again from the first movie, kind of like maybe that revenge story with, what was her name again? Kobue. Yeah. Coming back, and then, expecting that and it never happening kind of just threw me off.
Yeah. It was disappointing in that regard. I thought there was some interesting political stuff here, and we can get into this a little bit more as we
Yeah,
go on.
yeah.
But overall, I felt that it was just it didn't grab me as much as the first one did. Like the first one is just it's kishy, right? It's a B movie, but
Hmm.
it's a very entertaining B movie, and it's actually
Hmm.
there's some stuff that the script is doing, that the performances are doing, and there's some historical commentary in there that if you know the history, it elevates it above like typical B movie fare.
Hmm.
This one, it tries with the political stuff, but I don't think it quite gets there. And in fact, some of the action scenes, I felt that I don't. It's the same director too, which kind of surprised me because the action
Yeah.
did not impress me as much as it did in the first one. How about you?
Yeah, I agree with you there. There was the only like two scenes, like action scenes I really enjoyed was the first one, right at the beginning when they're kind of on the
Mm-hmm.
beach, and then at the end when they're at the temple. Those are pretty
Mm-hmm.
much the only two I enjoyed out of pretty much everything in the movie. Um, yeah, I really like the first one, especially the scene where it's just like she's walking on the beach and then she throws her sword, and then the
Mm-hmm.
title card rolls over and the sword's in the sand. I thought that was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Started off strong. That's what I thought, and I was like, but then from there again, yeah, it was kind of again unexpected for the rest of the storyline from there.
There's also that one scene which really distracted me was when she's walking down the path, and this is after that first scene, and all the guys are coming and attacking her, and it's like it's so weird because she's walking straight towards the camera. The camera's doing reverse tracking, and then you have all
Hmm.
these guys. They're like kind of like dancing around her and jumping in front. And
Yeah,
I'm just like, this is so badly choreographed. It felt very sloppy.
yeah. The only thing like that I was like kind of impressed by that part was again just thinking of it as like one take, all the
Mm-hmm.
way through. Because a lot of films now, I just feel like there would probably be like at least a bunch of different takes. So
Oh
that
yeah,
was the
yeah.
only kind of like okay, yeah, they kind of did this in one take kind of thing. Again, they're working on film, so like all the editing and stuff like that makes it easier when it's like that.
Mm-hmm.
Probably, I'm not a film editor by any means.
But yeah, that part was disappointing. Although one of the interesting things is, did you notice the actor who played Ransui Tokunaga, the
he looked
anarchist?
from yeah, he looked familiar. I didn't end up looking it up, but what does he end up being from?
So that is Juzo Itami, who was probably more well known these days as a director. I mean, he passed. He was murdered or died by suicide, depending on who you ask. Back in the early '90s, but he did like Tampopo. He directed uh, was it Mimbo and A Taxing Woman, a bunch of movies like that. The Funeral, I think, was also his.
Hmm.
So very it's really interesting to see him because I knew he was an actor before, but I'd never seen him in any movies. And then seeing him this was really cool because it's funny. He's playing an anarchist who's kind of fighting the system, and that's actually kind of what he ended up doing in his real life as a director too. Because a lot of his movies were very critical of Japanese society and
Yeah.
different aspects of Japanese culture. So it was really cool to
Hmm.
see him playing that kind of role in this movie too.
I did. Yes, kind of speaking on that, I heard or I read somewhere his character in Lady Snowblood was based off an actual character from that era, that Meiji era too. I can't remember their name. I think if you end up looking it up on like the Wikipedia, I kind of went
Yeah,
down the
it's
rabbit hole of that.
right here. Yeah, it's he was based on Kotoku Shusui
Yeah.
is the real person's name, and I'm just looking him up now, but I don't know much
Hmm.
about him. I'd never heard his name before, but I do know this was an
Same.
interesting time in Japan. So he had opposed the Russo-Japanese War, and he
Hmm.
founded the Heiminsha group and its newspaper. Um,
I
it
knew he moved
was
to America at some point. I think too. It
yeah,
said in there. Yeah.
largely in California, and then he eventually came back to Japan, and where there was a divide between the moderate social democrats and the more radical activists, and the he had supported the direct action, the anarchists, obviously, and then he was
Hmm.
executed for treason by the government in the high treason incident in 1911, due to
Yeah.
suspicion of being involved in a bomb plot.
Yes, yeah. Which I was like, that was interesting, because they kind of mentioned like, this whole bomb is going to go off with a document in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, it was probably connected to that then. I do recommend that people, if anyone's listening, because radical politics in Japan, there's a lot more history there than people would probably assume. Nowadays, a lot of the activism has successfully been subdued by the conservative LDP. But if people are interested in some of the history, there is a podcast called Against Japanism, hosted by I'm forgetting the guy's name, but he's been on this show before, and we talked about Night and Fog in Japan a few seasons back. So check out that, Against Japanism. He's got a lot of episodes dealing with some of the history. He's much more knowledgeable about it than I am. I only know like the bare bones of it here.
yeah.
But even with that bare little knowledge I had, I thought there were some interesting things happening in this movie, because this was a period in Japan where there were a lot of growing pains for Japan, because it was after the Meiji Restoration. You had the Russo-Japanese War. I believe this was the tail end of the Meiji period. It was right before the Taisho era. And the Taisho era had is mostly not remembered, not talked about much historically, but there were some really interesting things going on with labor movements, with democracy movements, Marxist movements, and all that kind of stuff. A lot of protests happening during that time. And this movie feels like it's really kind of touching into a lot of those things. And it's kind of telling. This came out in 1974, after like the radical political movements of the 1960s in Japan.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I remember. I know they were like surface level kind of part of like the Japanese-Russian War. I know like Japan ended up kind of having, they ended up sending like a peace treaty or something to Russia, but they ended up doing like a kind of like a sneak attack at night on one of the ports they wanted to kind of take over. So like, yeah, I was kind of going down that whole again, like reviewing that stuff after they mentioned that a lot in this film. And the kids actually sing about some of the battle in
That's right,
this movie as well too. So yeah, I thought that was interesting.
Both these movies have some interesting subversive ideas about Japanese politics. I felt, and I think the first one does a little bit better because it plays with those ideas of modernity, modernization versus tradition, but and it's critical about the elite and all that kind of stuff. And then you bring in this anarchist character in here who's, again, talking about like that story he tells about the worker who had he was working every day for a pittance and all that, and Yuki is forced to go into this spy mission by the secret police, by the elites, and then she ends up turning against them. You've got the shanty town type thing, the slums where she goes in to find his brother and all that kind of stuff, and there's just all this, and it's really interesting. And I think this is, Fujita is trying to say something here, but I don't think his message is really cutting through. I think it's kind of weighed down by the weight of the expectations of the first one. And I'm not sure. I mean, I know that the screenwriter had said that because this was a little bit freer. There was no comic they had to base it on. The script shortcomings, like the scriptwriter, he said that he felt that the script was not satisfactory. Because of different creative approaches between him, his co-writer, and the director. But he also felt that those script shortcomings made Fujita able to make the film more in his own style, which he hadn't been able to do in the first film. But I think those constraints were probably better in the first film, because the first film was a much stronger overall production, I thought.
Yeah, I agree with you. And also like talking about like, I kind of saw also somewhat symbolically like kind of older Japan and newer Japan talked about in this film as well. Like, when Yuki was with Ransui. Yeah. I thought of that as like kind of like maybe older ideal ideals, you know, in Japan, and then like obviously with Kikui is like newer. The only thing that kind of threw me off is because like Yuki ends up using like a katana or a sword most of the time as her weapon. You know what I mean? And that's kind of paired with her being like older ideals. And there's the one scene where she picks up the gun or takes the gun from the one person. You know, I kind of associated guns with like, you know, newer ideals symbolically in this. And she ended up killing him with it, which I was kind of like, you know, maybe, you know, kind of threw me for a loop, like watching it for like a second time, third time, like trying to see more of like the ideas they're trying to show in this film or the symbolism in this film. And I was like, okay, why is she taking this gun and shooting him? I just felt that was kind of like odd for her character in that one scene towards the end there. And so that kind of goes in point with what you were saying, whereas like some of it, you know, not being like constrained in a box creatively, ended up being, you know, when he did the second one, something like that happened where it didn't stay kind of like, okay, she's part of like, you know, symbolically older ideals. Well, this is more newer ideals. So I thought that scene was interesting when that ended up happening.
Yeah, there's that contrast is interesting because it's you've got kind of like a three-way battle here going on ideologically. You've got the I mean, I think you look at this Yuki representing, you know, traditional Japan, I think in a lot of ways, right? The way she dresses, like you mentioned, the sword fighting, all that kind of stuff. And then you've got the two approaches that are coming in modern Japan at the time. You know, you've got Kikui, representative of the more fascist style of leadership, and then you've got Ransui, representative of the more democratic, more anarchistic, more freedom oriented approach. And Japan has to kind of choose which way it's going to go. And I think what Fujita is saying is, you know, Japan chose the wrong path, obviously, because it ended up becoming a fascist state.
Yeah.
But I did think those political themes it's much more ambitious in its political themes, but I think it's maybe too ambitious in this movie.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely kind of
I don't,
flat.
Fujita I felt like Fujita needed a little bit more experience under his belt before he tackled something with these heavy political themes.
Yeah. Other stuff I thought he did pretty well. Like I know the first one, some of the stuff ended up like just kind of technically, you know, the cam being a little bit more shaky on some parts. This one, a lot of the stuff ended up, you know, like some of the zooms were like a lot more stable, stuff like that, and it looked great. You know, HBO Max ended up having it here, so like, you know, it being kind of brought up via film to streaming, I was like, okay, what's the quality going to be like? You know, depending on which version they had on there, like, is it from just like the DVD kind of style? But it looked great just like watching it. So
yeah. What are the things that we wanted to talk about with this one? Well, I mean, with that modernity stuff too, I think also the fact that you've got all these police officers and all that dressed in the more modern Western style. And Ransui is interesting because he's dressed more traditionally, but he's still also wearing like the Western style hat. So I thought that was and he's got like the mustache, which is more of a Western style tradition at that time.
Yeah. I thought that was interesting as well too.
But I think one of the things that holds this movie together really is probably Meiko Kaji. I mean, she's so good in these movies. Like that's one of the saving graces of, even though this sequel doesn't hold up as well as the original one, I think her performance stays pretty consistent throughout.
Yeah, she literally felt like it was, you know, her character from one was just put right into two. It didn't seem like there was any kind of change. You know, like the staring, the emotion with the face, it literally just seemed like from one and put in two. But again, like you mentioned earlier, you know, you could have totally changed, you know, her name and it could have been a standalone film.
Right. I also thought it was impressive that Ransui knew that that Yuki was a spy sent to kill him. And
Mm-hmm.
I like that the movie doesn't underestimate his intelligence, right? I mean, he's wanted by the government. This maid suddenly turns up to work for him out of nowhere. And I think in a lesser movie probably would have just tried to play that like, oh, I couldn't, curse your surprising but inevitable betrayal type of thing. But that doesn't happen here, right? He takes her to the grave, or he's telling her these stories, and he's like, I know you were sent here to kill me. And he's like, and I'm telling you all this because I know who you are, and I know you're just being used as a tool by them, and all this kind of stuff. And I thought that was very smart, because, he's trying to play the government against itself, trying to turn their weapons against them.
Yeah. That's that was one thing I was kind of like, okay, where are they going to go with this? But the scene where she brings, I think, the tea to him, and he like takes the sword out, and she reacts kind of like, her holding a sword, but it's just, the tray with the tea on it. Mm-hmm. That's when I was like, oh, he knew, like right there, he knows who she is.
Yeah.
So that was cool.
What are the things that you wanted to talk about with this movie?
Yes. I guess the biggest thing that, another thing I guess that kind of bothered me with this film is that you did mention that if her character was changed, it could be a standalone film, but it focused so much on Ransui's character that almost felt like she was like a supporting character in this film. So that was like one thing where it's just like, it being, Lady Snowblood, I was just like expecting more of her, kind of storyline with this. So that's just one thing that, I was like really kind of thrown off by too with it. But man, yeah, that's pretty much the only other thing.
One thing with that too is I think the fact that they were basing Ransui so much on Kotoku is that anarchist is that I think it almost feels like they wanted to write a movie about this guy, like a biopic or something like that, or something, historical film based on him. But Japan being what it was at the time, they probably couldn't get that type of movie funded. They probably couldn't get that type of movie greenlit. So they would have had to have dress it up in something like Lady Snowblood too, I think is that's a good point. My assumption of what might have happened.
Yeah, that makes sense. I totally agree with that. Actually, one thing I really liked was kind of like the prosthetics of it. There's that one scene where they cut like right into his face, and then there's a couple scenes too with like, getting stabbed in the eye.
Yeah.
That was really cool. I was like, practical kind of effects on there,
Oh yeah.
Again, with like the budget, I'm not, again, 100% sure, it not being like you're saying, kind of like a B movie ish. So that was really cool.
Practical effects. Yeah, I agree. Those practical effects were really good. That actually brings me to something else I wanted to talk about, was the brutality. So I'm not sure how much from either your time here or just in general about police interrogations in Japan.
Yeah, I've seen some videos and I've heard like stories and stuff like that where it's like very like, their rate of like I guess conviction maybe.
Yeah.
It's like 99% or 98% or something super high. So it's like more like if you get arrested, you're gonna get charged with whatever. Even if you're innocent, it has to be like really hard proof that you didn't do it. That's what I've heard from stories and like watching some videos on YouTube or reading articles and stuff like that.
Yeah, so there's a little bit more detail to go into with this, but so yeah, Japan does have that, and that's something the Japanese government loves to tout, is their high conviction rate, like 99% conviction rate or something like that. And the police and the public prosecutors are under a lot of pressure to maintain that high conviction rate. So, and this has a few different outcomes, which, so if you get arrested in America, and just to get this disclaimer out of the way first, I am not in any way saying that the American justice system is perfect. Trust me, it's got a ton of problems. That lots of reforms are needed. I mean, it's got the highest per capita prison population in the world, so there's a lot of issues in the American prison system, judicial system as well. But that being said, one of the things that you have in the American judicial system is when you get arrested, the police cannot question you unless you give your permission, right? If they ask you questions, you can just refuse to answer, and unless you have, and once you say, I want my lawyer, they're supposed to stop questioning and wait until your lawyer arrives. Doesn't always happen in practice, but that is what the law says. In Japan, it's different because they can hold you for a certain amount of time. I think it's up to... I think it's up
like
to
20 days or something like that.
Well, it varies. Like I think it's like 72 hours is the standard. Like they can hold you. It's like 48 or 72, something like that. So they can hold you up for like up to like 3 or 4 days before they let you speak to a lawyer. Interrogations are not recorded. Your lawyer, you don't have a right to have your lawyer present during questioning. And before you can even talk to your lawyer, they can hold you without letting you talk to your lawyer for that certain amount of time. If they want to extend it, they can go to a judge and they can ask for permission to extend it. And that extension, I think, can go up to a month. And those extensions are almost always granted from what I've read. And because those interrogations are not, there's no real code of conduct governing those interrogations. So there's a lot of psychological torture going on in there, right? They will wake you up at all times of the night. They will keep pressuring you, keep badgering you. Sleep deprivation is a very common tactic, shouting at you, sometimes beating. That has been known to happen as well. And the whole idea is trying to get you to confess. And once you sign a confession, that's almost ironclad in Japanese law. They will start, okay, well, you sign the confession, that's it. Even if the evidence proves, even if there's no hard evidence to go along with it, the confession is really all they need. So that happens a lot. That's a big problem with the Japanese judicial system. Another big problem is that they use to maintain the high conviction rate is they will only go after cases that they are sure they can get a conviction in. So there are a lot of times where they will let cases go, and they'll say like, okay, we don't have enough evidence for this. Or another thing, one of the things Japan loves to talk about is the how safe it is.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons they talk about that is because there's a lot of crimes that go unprosecuted. Because they're like, well, we don't have enough evidence. This is a small crime. It's not a very high, we can't guarantee a conviction here, so we're just going to let this case go. That happens a lot too. Also, with like a mysterious death cases, they will have times like, people talk about the high suicide rate in Japan. That's true, but it's also colored by the fact that if they find a mysterious death, sometimes they might say, okay, this looks like a suicide. Let's write this down as a suicide, and let's not investigate it any further. So that happens too.
Okay, yeah. Some of that stuff I did not know.
Yeah. So one of the reasons the murder rate in Japan is so low is because a lot of potential murders are written down as suicides. And there have been cases where like victims' families have said, there's no way, my loved one committed suicide. There's all this other stuff that was happening on, and the police are just like, it looks like a suicide to us. The prosecutor agrees to suicide. We're not going to pursue it any further.
Okay, yeah. Dang. Yeah, that's rough.
Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff. The Japanese judicial system especially is very politicized because those prosecutors and the police are under so much pressure to maintain those high conviction rates. I actually teach a class about once a year or so, like an English class to the local police officers here. And, when we talk, and a lot of times in that we'll talk about the differences between American policing and the American judicial system and the Japanese one. They are always so shocked when I tell them about the fact that in America, you are allowed to have your lawyer present during all the questioning. That just like it blows their minds when I tell them that.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah. I did not know that. I thought, because I remember again like reading or watching something where it's just like, I knew you didn't have to have like they couldn't allow your lawyer in but I didn't know that it's just like, yeah, they could just be like, nope, sorry, and then extend it for even longer.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there's some movements to change it. There have been some movements to push to have like interrogations recorded and stuff like that, but it's a very slow process. And Japanese population is so disengaged for the most part. Like they've got one of the lowest voter turnouts in the world, and it makes it very hard to get any sort of reforms pushed through. I mean, the LDP is pretty much despised by the majority of the population, but there's not enough people voting to get rid of them. So that's what happens.
Yeah.
And I feel like those prison interrogation scenes, I felt like that rang very true to what is happening in present Japan as well. I thought maybe an extreme example, but I think one of the things they were trying to say is not a whole lot has changed. Like there's still this element of fascism lingering in modern Japan as well.
Yeah. Where they're trying to like, they're beating him to ask where Yuki is,
right?
Stuff like that, and then they end up injecting him with some plague too and stuff like that. So yeah, that's a great point you bring up. I didn't even think about that while watching the film, because like, you know, I ended up watching it and I was like, another classic scene where the police end up, you know, totally, you know, torturing this person, you know. And then when you bring up, because it's just like here, maybe just because I grew up here or something like that, you know, I was just like, okay, you know, that's kind of like common, you know. But that's a great point you bring up. I didn't even think about that from Japan side of view.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a very easy thing to miss, especially. I mean, I think that's one of the downfalls of a film like this is also, and in a way, the first one too. But I feel like the political themes are there, but I feel like if you don't have some background, you're not going to notice it. It's very easy to gloss over that stuff. Because I see that when I teach the first Lady Snowblood, and I talk about these themes with my students, and they miss all this stuff. They have not picked up on any of it, except one thing is the scene at the end of the first one where Gishido falls over the balcony and he pulls on the Japanese and the American flags, and the Japanese flag falls, but the American flag stays. They pick up on that, but they end up taking, I think, the wrong message from it is what they get from it. And I don't think I feel like they're thinking too much of like, oh, well, that's saying that old Japan was better. I'm like, not really. It's a little bit more complicated than that. And I think it is more about the class issues, and especially in this one, I think the class issues are driven even further.
Yeah, when they talk about the 3 slums and stuff like that.
The slums, yeah, and you see the people running around the slums and all that, and also the people from the slums, they protect each other too. I thought that was also another good touch too.
Yeah.
But those are probably the biggest things I had really wanted to talk about. Is there anything else that we haven't mentioned so far that you wanted to mention? Any other final things you wanted to touch on?
Not really. Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed the film at the end of the day, you know, but I wouldn't put it, you know, with the first one. The first one's so iconic, especially when people end up like looking up like, you know, classic kind of Japanese films or samurai films. It ends up being always in a comment section or on some list. So, and then the second one, is, you know, I don't want to give it like a rating, but I definitely think it was kind of like mid, you know, tier, I guess, out of something. If I was going to give it kind of like a numerical rating or level rating.
No, I agree completely. And I think the fact that this film, again, if this wasn't called Lady Snowblood, if it was just called like Love Song of Vengeance or something, and you had a different name for the main character, I think I would like this film a lot more, honestly. But I feel like that first film, it ended on such a perfect note, right? Yuki's vengeance consuming her to the point where she gets the whole idea of like, you know, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. That is made so true by the fact that Kobue comes after Yuki because Yuki killed her father, and it just shows that vengeance is just like an endless circle. It never stops, which, you know, again, Kill Bill touched on too in that scene with Nikki's daughter, right? Where
Yep. Exactly.
she says to her, if you're still raw about it, then when you get older, you come find me, and I'll be waiting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
where the bride acknowledges that she knows that this is a dead end, right? It's just going to keep going and going and going. And that scene at the end of the first movie so punctuates it when Koboe stabs Yuki, because she was a tool. She was born out of vengeance. She dedicated her whole life for vengeance. Once she's got that vengeance, she's literally got nothing else to live for. And then that vengeance comes back on her. It's very karmic. And that is undermined by the fact that now you've got a sequel where they don't mention any of that stuff. And it's completely disconnected, other than the fact that this is a woman named Yuki, and she has a sword hidden in an umbrella. And that's basically the only similarity.
Yeah. You're right. Yeah. Totally does take away some of it if you end up watching the second one from it.
So yeah, I mean, I would say it's worth a watch. It's not a bad movie by any stretch of the imagination, but I would suggest go into this and in your mind, think of this as a separate movie. I think you'll enjoy it a lot more if you disconnect it from the first Lady Snowblood.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's pretty much the biggest kind of thing for, like I said before, biggest thing for me. Going in blind with it, not looking up anything. I was expecting more of the same, kind of like vengeance or some kind of it turned on its head with previous characters. But it's completely different. But as you've mentioned before, the like kind of political stuff with it being mentioned towards the end of the Meiji era.
Yeah, I mean, there's a movie in there. Like you have if you had like Koboe or like any other relatives of the people she killed in the first film. Like, did you ever see the Korean film Lady Vengeance?
I have not, no.
Okay, so that's got a very good movie, and it's part of Park Chan-wook, I think, was the director who did the Vengeance trilogy. So it was Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, Old Boy, and then Lady Vengeance. And it's a trilogy, but it's a thematic trilogy. They're only connected by the themes of vengeance. And Lady Vengeance has this thing where she gathers the surviving victims of whoever they're going after, and I think if you did something like that with Koboe gathering other victims and going after Yuki, that would have made for a much more stronger thematic sequel. As much as I like all the political stuff, I feel like it just undermines that first movie's ending and the themes.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Okay, Josh. So nothing else to say about Lady Snowblood, Love Song of Vengeance. So why don't you tell people where they can find you? Anything you want to promote before we close up today?
Yeah. I'm in kind of like a punk rock band right now. We're actually recording some music currently. So if you end up liking kind of like punk pop kind of music, maybe like Blink-182, 4 Years Strong kind of stuff, Commit This to Memory. I think it's Commit This to Memory IL on all socials. Okay. So yeah, some of our lyrics end up being kind of like, we have a song coming out kind of about like the Loki season. So we end up kind of relating it to various kind of fandoms for some songs as well. So if you enjoy that stuff, check it out. Commit This to Memory.
Very cool. Okay. So check that out. We'll have links to that stuff in the show notes as well. Josh, thanks for coming on again. It was nice talking with you. Glad you're landing on your feet and not experience too much reverse culture shock.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate being back on it. So
yeah. So that does it for this episode of Japan on Film. JapanOnFilm.com is the website. Japan on Film on Twitter and Instagram. And again, we're part of the We Made This network now. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for watching, and we will talk to you next time. Hey guys, thank you so much for listening to this season of Japan on Film. If you remember the announcement at the beginning of this season, I told you that we had actually had 10 episodes scheduled. Unfortunately, one of those episodes that we had scheduled did not end up working out. Something came up. We had to reschedule, and as of this recording, we have not yet been able to find the time to reschedule. And we had already after already having pushed the start for this season back, I didn't want to do it again, especially after already releasing the announcement. So I decided we'll just cap this off at 9 episodes instead of the original planned 10. But hopefully, if we're able to get that episode recorded, then you'll be hearing it in season 10. It's a returning guest, so I'm confident we'll be able to work out a schedule at some point. It's just, things are crazy, especially when some of your guests are on the other side of the world. Anyway, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you really enjoyed this season. I really enjoyed getting back into it. Had a lot of fun talking with some returning guests and also a bunch of new guests. So this was a lot of fun for me as well. And also, very special thanks to everyone at the We Made This Podcast Network for first inviting me to join, and then also for being welcoming, for helping me find some guests, both for this season and for next season. It's been a real treat getting to know people on that network, and I'll be active on that Discord as well. So if you have not yet joined the Discord, please go ahead and click the link in the show notes, and I'll be in there. We've got a channel specifically for Japan on Film, so you can go there. I'll be posting up stuff related to Japanese movies whenever I find the time. And so far, I've been really glad that people have been interested in hearing the show again. As I said in the announcement, we've had a flurry of people express interest, so much so that if everyone who's expressed interest in being on in season 10 is able to get on, then I think we've already got a complete season arranged. So we'll see if that actually works out. It's going to be a bit of a ways off because just, work and everything like that. So it'll be a few months before I'm even able to start scheduling recordings for season 10, let alone to start releasing those episodes. But I'm hoping to start recording probably around November, December, and if all goes well, we'll be able to start releasing episodes in January. Again, we'll see how if that works out or not. But thank you so much for listening. If you've been a YouTube watcher as well, I just want to say I'm sorry that we haven't been able to get the video episodes back on track. I just don't have the time, unfortunately. Editing these episodes can take up a good chunk amount of time, and that is multiplied by a few factors when you also have to edit for video too. So rather than push off the start date even longer, I felt it best to just focus on the audio. So if you've been a video watcher, I'm really sorry. I'm just not able to do it with my other time commitments, and the audio is all I can really focus on for now. Anyway, that does it for now. Again, japanonfilm.com is the website. We are Japan on Film on Twitter and Instagram. Please make sure to subscribe, rate, and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts, and tell your friends. Let them know about this show. Let other people who are interested in Japanese movies or are maybe interested in finding out more about Japanese movies. Anything you can do to help spread the word will definitely help us out. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next season. The Japan on Film podcast is produced by me, Perry Constantine, in conjunction with the We Made This Podcast Network. Visit japanonfilm.com for show notes, episodes, merchandise, and information about being a guest yourself. You can also reach out to me on the website's contact form if you have questions or comments about Japanese movies or the show itself. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at JapanOnFilm. If you'd like to help support the show, you can donate at japanonfilm.com, WeMadeThisNetwork.com, or by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can find links with information about each guest and join the discussion on the We Made This Discord in the show notes of each episode. And now, listen to hear what's coming up next on the We Made This Network.
Do you know your Daleks from your Drashings?
Or your Zygons from your Zagreus?
Do you know what the TARDIS stands for?
And do you know which Doctor Who stories featured Kevin Grimlock, the cyborg T-Rex that became the Doctor's companion?
Then this is a Doctor Who podcast for you. I'm Baz Greenland, and each fortnight I chat to my son Ben.
Hello.
And the occasional guest as we cover 60 years of Doctor Who on TV, Big Finish, and more.
And I did really enjoy that one. Except that wasn't really actual pirates, it was Badger pirates in space, but it was still piratey.
Badger pirates in space?
Yes. But I am willing to make an exception for pirates this episode.
Donald Sumpter is amazing.
He's good.
I love the fact that he just pops up. He just pops up. Probably Rassilon. Probably.
Well, they do confirm later on he is.
I think they do.
Yeah,
don't
he
they?
says I'm Rassilon the Redeemer.
Of course he does. Bloody hell!
And he has the gauntlet as well, which gives the hint at that.
Yeah.
I'm nodding profusely.
Yeah. We're very proper classic Doctor Who as well, a lot of it as well.
Yes.
In a week, has done more for the show than the last 5 years.
I do like how Ross D. Davies is kind of the PR spokesman for the Centurion special. That's quite fun.
Yeah. And he's also saying, oh, well, Jodie and Chibnall still have an episode left. I'm not going to tread on their feet, but he is 14, just so you know, for the filming purposes. And a week later, oh, yeah, by the way, these guys are back. Just thought you'd want to know.
Find us on the We Made This network.
And all good podcast providers.
What about the bad ones?
Yes, them too.
Ah, good.
Because somewhere there's danger.
Somewhere there's injustice.
Somewhere else, the tea's getting cold.
You know, we probably should throw that tea away now. It has been sat there since 1989.